everybody, and good morning and welcome once again to another one of ResPublica's seminars in our Lifelong Education Commission. It's with great pleasure today that we're going to discuss Doncaster and Doncaster's approach to skill acquisition that I think is, well, one of the leading examples of the differences that local authorities can make in the United Kingdom. So we're very grateful once again to our chair, Chris Skidmore MP, and to the Minister, Luke Hall, who will be joining us on the half hour. So a few remarks at first. As many of you will know, the Lifelong Education Commission has been set up to try and provide a holistic renewal of our entire post-18, post-16 for some people, education and skills system, with a focus on what we can do to give everybody, those who've been very successful, those who've been burned, the opportunity to reskill and learn new skills. Now, one of the most interesting things about the attempt to acquire skills is that we've never really managed in this country to get the relationship between aggregate skill levels mandated at the centre and delivery of those skills at the locality right. As we follow the politics of agglomeration at the national level in trying to push up skills. But what often happens, which is what happens with agglomeration, is those skills tend to suck skills and people seeking those skills from out of less advantaged areas into the centre. And so you repeat this system again and again. And those industries that can help lead places out of relative economic depression, particularly in the higher knowledge sectors, are the ones who often most suffer from skilled labour shortages. And what we lack in this country is the ability to stitch it all together, to create a collaborative local venture between the providers of skills, be it universities, be it FE colleges, be it private sector professional training, to enable those skills gaps to be met at the local level for those firms that are crucially helping lead areas into, for instance, high levels of export. We just don't have the systems and architecture in place to do that. And many of the measures that we mandate centrally, paradoxically, work against the interests of those left behind areas locally. And we also need to make new sorts of asks of our businesses in those localities. Instead of just complaining about skills, they need to invest in them. But if you look at the evidence, far too much of local employer investment is in regulation. It isn't actually in, it's in regulation and compliance rather. It isn't actually in generation of new skills. And if we can all recall kind of Andy Haldane's famous remark about there not being a long tail of non-innovative companies, it goes right along the spine and up to the neck. We've really failed to produce the conditions whereby those smaller entities operating outside of the centralized areas can pick up innovation and pass that innovation on to its own staff. These are the mechanisms that, if we get right, can lead the country out of this hugely polarized economically and social situation that we're in. So I'm absolutely thrilled that we've got the stellar cast that we have today, leading example of a visionary local authority, an expert on international comparisons from PISA, and the Minister, all chaired by our chair, Chris Skidmore MP, who I will hand over to now. Chris, over to you, and thank you.
Thank you, Philip, for that introduction and overview of what this seminar is hoping to encompass. I'm delighted that we have Damian Allen, the Chief Executive of Doncaster Council, able to be with us today. And Damian will be giving a speech and then being joined by Michael Stevenson, who's the co-founder of the Global Education Leaders Partnership, who's also senior advisor at the PISA outfit, the OECD. And I'm hoping this seminar will help sort of entice out some of the core themes that we will be needing to look at as the Commission when it comes to taking a place-based approach to education skills and lifelong learning. What is the involvement that local authorities and other local institutions can play when it comes to looking at how we create the local skills ecosystem that is needed for flexible learning, for spotting those opportunities for individuals to retrain, to upskill, and what do those positive outcomes look like? I'm delighted to announce that this seminar also marks the launch of the Commission's second report into place-based approaches to lifelong education, which has kindly been sponsored by Doncaster Council, by Doncaster Chambers of Commerce and the DN Colleges Group. And I'm really looking forward to working with them on this report, which we hope will be due in November. It will follow the first report which we're working on with Birkbeck College around the qualifications framework and how we sort of look at what is needed to regulatory change to be able to enable greater lifelong learning and flexible learning pathways. So we will be spending this first half hour setting out a vision, and we'll be joined then by Minister of State for Local Government and Regional Growth, Luke Hall, who'll be able to set out also the government's ambitions. And it's always the intention of this commission to try and work with government to be able to create new policy ideas, to inspire opportunities for the government to realise what can be done if we look at the best practice that's already out there, but what is needed to change in order to be able to spread that best practice and to be able to give national opportunities to everyone where we spot local advantages that already exist. So on that theme, I'm going to hand over now to Damian Allen, Chief Executive, Doncaster Council, to give his presentation, and then Michael will follow in on the back of that, sort of picking up also some of the international examples that we might be able to learn and listen to as the United Kingdom. Damian, over to you. Thank you.
Good morning, and thanks for the introduction, Chris. As a Chief Executive of a local authority, as well as someone who's got an extensive background in education, I'm extremely grateful to have this opportunity to share the work that we're doing in Doncaster to transform the delivery of education skills as a key driver for our borough strategy. And I very much welcome the Minister's engagement with suggestions for how government can support this. As you're aware, we're working alongside partners to produce a report on place-based transformation of lifelong learning. And certainly as the Chief Executive and convener of the place in Doncaster, I fundamentally believe that all action should be socially embedded and socially situated. We all have a sense of identity. We all have a sense of origin, and we certainly all feel a sense of belonging. And our new borough strategy has as its mission thriving people, places, and central to human thriving and flourishing is lifelong education and learning. And one of my favorite quotes is by Václav Havel. He says, education is the ability to perceive the hidden connections between phenomena. Viewing any local education system as a complex adaptive system, revealing the hidden connections and building greater connectivity have been fundamental organising principles for me in adopting a collaborative approach here in Doncaster. This has been our developing story for the past 6 years. And our story, of course, begins with a legacy as a post-industrial borough. And the challenges are well known. They're long-standing and have been exacerbated by the pandemic. And as a borough, we're one of the 20 most deprived areas in England, with 1 in 4 children living in low-income families. And consequently, our health outcomes are impacted. We don't live as long as we should. And we live more of our years with disability and illness than our more affluent counterparts. So too, our educational outcomes, with a number of our most deprived areas being in the 10% of most deprived nationally in terms of education and skills measures. So Doncaster has become a place of low skills and low pay. And the industries the place attracts often exploit this. Social mobility is low, and people feel trapped in a cycle of hard work for little reward, often in insecure environments. However, things are on the up, and Team Doncaster has worked together effectively in recent years to deliver a number of achievements and improvements. And notably, since we published our inclusive growth strategy in 2018, we've seen some significant achievements. In just 5 years, our economy had grown by 30%, with an increase in business starts, a growth in both private and public sector jobs, and an increase in house building and affordability. And partnership collaboration is a key strength of this place. Together, we have formed the Doncaster Promise Compact between local businesses and education providers, a dedicated strategic approach to working with anchor institutions and to community wealth building. And further to this, in 2016, I invited an independent panel of experts to review our education system. The panel laid out 30 recommendations in their One Doncaster report, all of which we adopted. We now have a developing university city agenda with 4 centres of excellence tied to local industry specialisms, an established hybrid model of post-16 education that includes high quality specialist provision, such as the National College for Advanced Transport and Infrastructure, and a successful inclusion programme, which has seen us opening up the first UK big picture learning school, and high quality one-to-one and online all age careers, information, advice and guidance support. And as well as this, of course, our work to transform outcomes for disadvantaged pupils through a DFE funded social mobility opportunity area programme. So much has been done, but there's much more to do. And despite these improvements, as a place, Doncaster still lacks opportunity. It has almost all of the ingredients, however, for success, but the traditional recipe isn't working for us. Many of our learners are disengaged with traditional academic forms of learning, and many are not even acquiring NVQ level and other qualifications. And there's a large gap to the national averages at levels 3 and 4, and a high proportion of residents have no formal qualifications at all. Employers report that young people lack the higher level and technical skills alongside the broader essential life skills needed in the modern workplace. And this skills gap is exacerbated by an exodus of young people who leave Doncaster in search of higher education and higher skilled and higher paid employment. All of this is indicative of a low skills equilibrium. Therefore, over the past 18 months, we've been working with key partners to develop an ambitious 10-year education and skills strategy that will bring about a paradigm shift in the way we deliver education. Our vision is to achieve equitable and inclusive lifelong learning that empowers people to fulfill their potential and thrive in life and work. To achieve this, we've identified 5 priority areas to drive change within the existing system. However, we're also committed to taking a regenerative whole systems, whole place and whole life approach to lifelong learning. And this requires systemic and cultural change. And this is why we've been working with Michael Stevenson from the OECD. Together, we shaped a blueprint for the future. We call this the Talent and Innovation Ecosystem Model, or TIE for short. The TIE is deeply rooted in place. It's centered on a set of key industry specialisms and harnesses the strengths of our local assets. It recognizes the needs of residents and of local employers, which is crucial for us to improve our economic landscape. It attracts new sectors that offer quality jobs and to tackle the ongoing exodus of young and talented people. It takes a more vocational, innovative and problem-based approach to learning for people of all ages and backgrounds. And it places equal value on the development of technical, social emotional skills alongside academic knowledge. And it brings together stakeholders to collaborate on aligned learning with real-world design and commercial challenges. This education to employment learning approach will create new learning pathways to more sustainable careers and help fill key skill gaps, opening up across not just the key sectors locally, but in the national economy as well. It also draws on local expertise across the system to provide learning and assessment that has real currency with employers. TIE also supports more informal learning through online or badged certificate learning, with the huge potential to kickstart new skills, career choices, or indeed to cultivate unrecognised talent. And there are a number of cross-cutting tie initiatives, which I believe will have a transformative effect on the people and the place. And these include, first, a programme to develop a Doncaster curriculum, spanning across stages and ages, developed in partnership with employers. This would have an associated new set of credentials and an increased focus on formative assessment. In other words, assessment for learning rather than assessment of learning. Second, a programme of engagement facilitated by a Doncaster Centre for Applied Learning that is sponsored by local businesses. This would accredit qualifications and communicate the learning offer. Third, a programme to engage with local employers and wider partners to identify learning purposes, setting out what social, emotional skills and industry-specific competencies are needed. And for this to occur, it's crucial to see skills for work and life as the portable currency or human capital in the system. This is the adaptive human potential we want to see flourish in our place to cope with the increasingly complex challenges and wicked problems that exist out there. So, where else is this approach being successful? And as I say, we haven't created these ideas in a vacuum. We've been evidence-based, and we've worked with Michael Stevenson to ensure this approach models the best practice globally. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Damian. Yes, so at the OECD, I have a responsibility for the development of the PISA survey, which has assessed 15-year-olds in maths and science and reading for 20 years. How should it evolve? And I also work with the highest performing systems around the world on their own future education strategies. But once upon a time, I went to school in Doncaster, so it was fantastic, really, when Damian asked me if I'd bring some of my thoughts and experiences into the place where I was not born, but certainly brought up. I thought I'd say a bit about two places around the world which I think are doing things that parallel the Doncaster work on the talent and innovation ecosystem, and maybe offer some indications of what it takes to make it happen at both local and national level. The first being Pittsburgh in the USA, Pennsylvania, in some ways a little like South Yorkshire, and the USA is hovering around PISA country average at best, and I dare say Pennsylvania a bit below that. The other example I wanted to speak briefly about was Finland and a set of municipal ecosystems. Finland, of course, has been top of PISA in its early years, though has slipped slightly since, though there is a debate about why that might be. Pittsburgh first. I wanted to talk about the Remake Learning Network, which is a group of interconnected and highly innovative people and organizations across the region who are trying to make learning more engaging and relevant and fair for young people, bearing in mind that those young people are navigating rather remarkable levels of social and technological change. The approach is to help formal educators design very new kinds of learning experience for learners in and out of school and college. The governance is through something called the Remake Learning Council, which brings together executives and staff from business, higher education, public education, civic and cultural organizations, including the museums and the galleries, sports organizations, foundations. And I guess their emblematic policy has been to create remarkable events. They first were called Remake Learning Days, they became weekends, they become weeks, with an array of hands-on learning experiences for learners and families to attend, maker spaces, drop-in coding sessions. The most recent involved 30,000 people from across the Pittsburgh region. But the message has been education is not for the few, nor even for the many. It really is for everybody, including those who have felt their best days in education were long behind them, maybe out of work, maybe needing to reskill or upskill. And this has been a transformational experience for many people across the Pittsburgh region. The aim is to create learners, and this goes back to where we began this session, with skills in critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, collaboration, better connected to their communities, cross-cultural understanding, connected across all the places where they live, work, and play, and building deeper relationships with families, with peers, with educators. The positioning of this in terms of an ecosystem is, I think, quite soft in a way. I'll come on to contrast it with Finland, but this is really a reservoir of resources and programs to support and enrich the public education system. The system stays there. Its formal institutions, its accountability frameworks, its funding mechanisms, but it's hammocked, if you like, by this much wider approach. What has government done to support it? Well, in 2018, there was the PA SMART initiative launched by the Pennsylvania Department of Education. Advancing grants, they were called, of $500,000 each, supporting these cross-sectoral ecosystems, and $30 million for professional training for teachers, recognizing that if you're going to be teaching as part of this much wider informal ecosystem, it takes new techniques and new expertise. But I think the next step in terms of partnership with state and local government will be creating space for innovation, encouraging it, not choking it off, and further funding, I think, from the Pennsylvania Department of Education for community listening, surveys, and developing the next phase of the program. So let me turn from that to what I see as the kind of harder version of the ecosystem in Finland. This is the Digi1 program, 6 ecosystems in 6 Finnish municipalities, initially for students in primary and secondary, but then going out to early childhood and critically to skilling and upskilling adults. The purpose of these municipal ecosystems is to improve the quality and breadth of learning, to create local trust and autonomy, which has been a feature of the Finnish system for many, many years, and to increase adaptability across the system. Damian talked about complex adaptive systems. The approach is, it sounds like a technology initiative. It's not. It's not just a common platform. It really is a full ecosystem that unites 4 different groups of people around the education and skills delivery. One group is the users, seen not just as the students, but teachers and parents as well. How can they create learning pathways for all into flourishing lives and valuable and worthwhile jobs? The second group is education providers, public institutions, but also private institutions with an interest in cost-effective learning, but also well-being. The third group is content providers across learning materials, old form and new media, games, tools, but can there be an easier and more effective way to share and use learning materials? And the final group, digital service providers, companies, also public services, cost-effective development and marketing and provision of digital services. The governance, well, it's local. You're saying to employers, educators, local government, all sorts of education bodies. Can you sync your differences? Can you pool your funding? Can you agree on a core set of values and policies and govern and orchestrate in the interest of the municipality and its education future? Government at national level has done 3 things. It does provide national orchestration, the rules of the game, the business model, how the finances flow. It develops ethical principles for the use of the data, and it models how you use the data for evidence-based policy making, not least how you take the data from the municipal ecosystems and link it into national registers and databases, which cover, for example, levels of performance. Additional government support, some significant seed corn funding at the start, though not extraordinary sums by any means, and then that triggering resources from elsewhere across the system, including commercial organizations, research organizations. But the positioning, as I say, of this is harder. I think it's much more that the system becomes an ecosystem. It kind of strips off old clothes and puts on new ones. And you see here a formalized collaboration across the actors in support of education. I was just going to end by saying something brief about learning ecosystems more broadly. This picture was pulled together last summer by an organization called Global Education Futures, led by Pavel Luksha. And it looked across the world, across dozens of examples of ecosystems, and it said there are really 5 categories of these things. One is the category which Doncaster exemplifies, a talent and innovation ecosystem, developing entrepreneurs for new areas in the economy. But others would be learning ecosystems for regenerative economies, learning ecosystems for social or cultural innovation, learning ecosystems for urban civic development and citizenship to get people participating again in local democracy, ecosystems for fair and just opportunities. I think this recognizes that the ecosystemic approach is all about learning together over time, but it's not relevant only to education systems, but to many other areas and dimensions of policy. And it recognizes the potential for multiple learning ecosystems to come together in places to support community development. So Damian, as you look at Pittsburgh and Finland and those wider ideas about learning ecosystems, it may be that you see what government might do at local, but in particular, I guess, at national level to nurture this kind of approach.
Thanks, Michael. And I've noticed that the minister's arrived, which is probably a prompt to get a move on. More than happy to pick up some of this in questions and answers, Minister, but I'll just give you a very, very short flavour of what I think are the areas that we might want to explore. And let me be very clear, levelling up, I think, is a great concept, and we're all for it. And we're eagerly awaiting the white paper, as I say. But for us, it isn't just about short-term solutions and extra cash. That would be great. It isn't just about new shiny buildings or redirected bus routes. We genuinely need to pull ourselves towards what others might have taken for granted. And the key to unlocking our potential, I believe, does lie in our skills base. However, what's also clear is that the existing system isn't delivering for us, and levelling up for us, therefore, needs to recognise that we need to do things differently here. And I think that means going beyond the skills and post-16 education white paper, which is very welcome. I think it also means further devolution of powers and a license to innovate to places. And I think it also requires us to have a more coherent, joined up approach across government departments. And I know there's some interesting developments afoot there as well. So I'll leave it there, Chair, if that's okay, and hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Damian, and thank you, Michael, also for both giving that insight into the work that Doncaster is pioneering, and I'm sure we'll want to touch on some of that in questions, and also those comparators with Pittsburgh and elsewhere in the country. I think, Minister Hall, thank you very much for joining us today. It is deeply appreciated. We've just had a sort of 2 presentations covering some of the work that's taking place in South Yorkshire, but also how this can be seen not only as a key local initiative, but actually international exemplar as well. And I've announced that the Lifelong Education Commission that I chair will be producing its 2nd report on how we can foster place-based approaches to lifelong learning and skills development for the future, and that we should really put on a pedestal and be proud of some of the best practice work that exists in the UK as being sort of world leading in itself. And this report will be worked on over the summer and will be published in November at the Global Leaders Partnership Forum that will be taking place in Doncaster. So we're really looking forward to that work that's been initiated by Doncaster Council and their partners. Minister Hall, for the audience's benefits, you're Minister of State for Regional Growth and Local Government. You don't have had to do this event. Obviously, it covers education, and so is slightly outside of your Whitehall brief. But obviously, when it comes to looking at the skills agenda, this has been absolutely instrumental when it comes to local devolution and giving powers to metro mayors to be able to recognise what works best in their local areas. And we'd be very keen to hear from you, the government's vision for how skills fits into the local government work that you've been undertaking, and to have an overview from you of where the Commission should focus its attention, which are the areas where you sort of feel need the most work. And then we'll take a couple of questions. I'll use the Chair's prerogative as okay to ask a couple of questions to yourself, and then open up a wider discussion for then Damian and Michael to come in to answer some questions from the floor as well. So, Minister Hall, thank you for your time today, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Damian. Good morning, everyone. I hope my technology is okay. I've had more problems this morning than I can possibly explain with technology. I hope it's all working fine. And I'm really excited to hear about the report that you've just raised. I think that sounds really timely and helpful. So very much thank you for the work you're doing there. You're right. A lot of this work that we're talking about today does cover DFE, but there's a really important part for MHCLG to play, I think, in the whole government levelling up agenda. And so I think one of the things I thought perhaps I'd just run through were some of the work that we've done so far in MHCLG, some of the plans that we've got for the future, a bit about the white paper, and then perhaps how that links into some of the important work you're doing, particularly on skills and some of the sort of revenue-focused funding streams that we're going to be delivering as well and are starting to deliver. I think what's really playing, and I think everyone can see that the concept of levelling up is something that the Prime Minister is personally driving. It's the central mission of this government, and he's taking a leading role in doing that. The concept of it, people always think is quite vague. I actually think it's quite clear. It's really about driving improvements in living standards, trying to improve the private sector in places where it's weak, trying to spread opportunities so people don't have to leave their hometown to get the skills they want, to go on to do the job they want, and can do that wherever they live in the country. I think you're right that a key vehicle for us to do and achieve that is to make sure we're empowering local places, whether that's councils, mayoral combined authorities, or potentially even other types of geographies, to make sure they have the resources, the money, the control devolved to them from central government to deliver some of those objectives. You're also right that a lot of the substantial policy meat, so to speak, is going to be set out later this year in a levelling up white paper that we're going to publish. A lot of that work is going on in detail now, so I think your report and your work is very timely, and we're very interested in keeping you abreast of what you've done. Already, though, listening to some of the comments about place-based investment, I would still argue that that's a really important part of delivering on the skills agenda as well, some of the capital investment. I think if you look at some of the things that we've started to deliver already and our involvement as that in that government department, I'll take the Towns Fund as an example, £3.6 billion a fund supporting over 100 towns to bring forward their own local solutions to delivering some of the problems that they see in their communities, specifically around regeneration, development, infrastructure projects that they want to see. And there are some great examples of that. So if you look at Stavley, they're using town deal funding to develop a rail innovation and training centre that's focused on green technology, so that the next generation of cleaner, faster, greener, better equipped trains are built and delivered here in the UK. If you look at what we're doing in Hartlepool, we're supporting the town with £25 million to deliver a new health and care academy, a civil engineering institute, and that's really helping to boost local training and skills and deliver high paid jobs. My favourite example, if I can, well, second favourite perhaps, my favourite is in Barrow. We're delivering a £25 million package there, and that's helping to deliver a £10.4 million learning quarter in Barrow, and that's really influential in that town's skills base and progress they can make. If you look at the demographics in Barrow, only 30% of people there hold a degree level qualification. It really severely weakens the labour market in that community. It hampers local growth. But the project we're delivering through these capital funding will help deliver a new university campus in the town. It will deliver a skills academy, and that will help go some way to fill what is frankly a higher education black spot in that particular town and help employers ensure they have people with the right skills to fill the gaps in the labour market that they are so constantly telling us they need. I was almost going to say favourite in Barrow. Clearly, my favourite example of this is in Doncaster, because we're spending £25 million from the Towns Fund to transform the station gateway there, and that's going to be creating better transport opportunities, increasing footfall as well. So, even though those few examples are just a small part of a much bigger wave of investment, I think the broader point is that there's a lot of transformation that's going on there to improve skills and create opportunity, even though it's capital-based direct investment. That's an England-only fund. One of the stages we're taking now with the Levelling Up Fund is that is going to be delivered UK-wide, and we're starting to deliver this next round of funding now. Again, the same sort of projects that it can be delivered through that can be so influential for communities. That is going to help deliver the sort of projects that we heard about at the start: roads, railways, theatres, galleries, cultural assets, heritage assets in communities too. And so that's a key pillar of our programme. Crucially, one of the points I'd make is that there is a really big role for councils in the delivery of these funds. A big part of the success of these is based on the local leadership that places provide in identifying their own solutions. You look at the town deals, where we are asking towns to form boards, put together local projects, show that they can deliver those, and we're funding them to do that. So there's a really important increased role for local authorities there. But also, I think when we're looking at levelling up, which is so fundamentally about improving ultimately living standards for people and growing the private sector, we hear about that a lot, but I think it's almost really important to say that it's also about delivering other types of outcomes as well. So absolutely on education, also on health, also on policing, but also on some of the things that probably seem more holistic and difficult to measure as well. So whether that's pride in people's community, people's ability to improve their own quality of life, hard to measure on a scale of GDP or economic forecast, but still really important to people, and that's an important part of the agenda too. We do want to make sure that can be all delivered in conjunction with clear, good quality jobs, boosting training, growing productivity in places that have seen economic decline through the loss of industry. And again, I come back to this point that crucially, the way that we want to do that is by letting local areas come forward with their own solutions. What we do not want to do is impose top-down solutions to these type of problems that different communities face, because we're not equipped to do it. They are much more effective at finding their own solutions. I think one of the other things that we have been looking at is the clear sort of causal link about local positive, virtuous cycles in the economy. It's very clear that the drivers of growth, be that employers, people, investment, are attracted to places that are already growing. So that's a really important piece of the policy work we're looking at for the Levelling Up white paper about how we can make those sort of cycles productive, spread them right across the country. I think there's a big piece of work for us to do there. I certainly think an area where our department crosses over with all the excellent work that you're doing is taking the skills agenda and making sure we're supporting that adequately in the right way. If you look at human capital, it is quite clearly, all the evidence suggests, the most important factor in driving differences in productivity in some of these places around the country over time. And that's in addition to the role that human capital can play in individual personal well-being, some of those other things that are harder to measure as well, and helping people reach their life potential. It's also equally clear that there's big room for us to improve in this area. You only have to look at some of the stats that I'm sure that you are very, very well versed in. Almost half of the adults in our country have numeracy skills no better than the standard we expect from an 11-year-old. Over half of the people that are currently in the workplace do not have the basic standard of digital skills that we want them, employers want them to have in the modern workplace. And you see the impacts of that for employers not being able to fulfill the vacancies they want with the types of skills they want. And we do want to look at how we can address some of the market failures which have ended up delivering underinvestment in training in the UK. I think that's been a big problem too. We know that employers will only invest, they will only expand, they'll only create skills and opportunity for people in some of these areas we want to level up if we're able to do that. Otherwise, the opposite of what we want to happen will transpire, which is that people move away from these communities into other parts of the country where they feel their skills can be better utilised and they can have more opportunity in the workplace. So there is a big opportunity for us in this Parliament, I think, to make progress here. It's quite scary when you think that the vast majority of the workforce of 2030, 2035 are already in the workplace today. So one of the things that we need to make sure it's included in this Levelling Up white paper is ways for us to address people that are already in the workplace with proper adult educational skills, support and packages. I know that's something that the DfE are doing a huge amount on as well. One of the other things I just want to flag, if I could, Chris, was about some of the skills and revenue-based funding that we are going to go on and deliver in MHCLG, working with other government departments, particularly on the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. This is going to be a key part of some of the packages that we're going to deliver over this Parliament and beyond. It's really going to be a good part of our Levelling Up agenda. We really want to use this opportunity we have to maximise the benefit of leaving the EU by adjusting the way that we deliver these funds, because the vast majority of the feedback that we had about the previous EU structural funds was that they were too siloed, too bureaucratic. People and places were just not able to deliver the types of interventions that would really make a difference on skills and people in their community. So we want to make sure that's less prescriptive, less siloed, and more based on local insight and knowledge as well. So there's a key part there about cutting out the bureaucracy in the delivery of that fund. It's going to have core themes for investment, and we've already published that in the heads of terms, in people, in skills, in communities, and local businesses, to help them create the opportunity for people who face the biggest barriers to the labour market, for instance, or all those that are most in need. So again, that's going to be a UK-wide fund, and we're already looking at how we can make sure that reaches sort of all corners of the different parts of the UK. We'll also make sure that that ramps up over the course of the Parliament to make sure it reaches at least £1.5 billion a year from 22-23, and it's targeted at places that really need it the most. And part of that will be investing in work-based training, supplementing some of the tailor-based national programmes that I'm sure you've talked to DfE about and others that support local skills packages that are tailored to individual council or local economic area geographies as well. There's a second portion of that fund that we are going to deliver, which will be targeted to the people that are most directly in need. So that will be bespoke skills, employment supports, programmes that are tailored to individual council or combined authority or economic geography areas as well, trying to improve cohorts for specific outcomes for specific cohorts of people. So we're going to be publishing more information about that in a framework later this year. The full investment profiles we set out at spending review later on in the year by the Chancellor. And finally, can I perhaps just highlight then the UK Community Renewal Fund, which is our sort of 1-year transitional mechanism to move towards the UK SPF. So this is an extra £220 million we're delivering this year. And really it's about trialling the freedom and flexibility that we're giving councils and local authorities, combined authorities, to deliver some of these programmes. We had the deadline for applications a couple of weeks ago, hugely positive response from right around the country. We identified priority areas based on an index of economic need for the UK Community Renewal Fund, so that we are hugely excited about starting to work through those applications, start to deliver some as well this year. And again, that has those same core key aims in lots of respects that I've talked about for the UK SPF, developing flexible packages for skills, communities, business, projects to support people into employment too. So really important pilot. We're looking to learn from that, really in the market for thoughts about the delivery of the UK SPF. And so, where that overlaps with skills, absolutely a great area to hear more from you about how you think that should be shaped. Look, Chris, I think I've talked enough now, so I'll just say, look, thank you very much. Happy to take any questions on this, but I really do think some of these schemes we're delivering, I know your prime involvement will be with DfE in lots of ways, but are really influential. So please don't forget about the importance of how we can deliver this. Thanks for the work you're doing, and perhaps I'm back over to you to take any questions that are useful.
Thank you so much for that, Damian. Really helpful to understand where we are in the cycle with sort of government's thoughts and where the Commission can help to influence future thinking and what is sort of planned as well. Minister Hall, if I could maybe sort of start with just a couple of questions to the Chair, and then we can sort of open up sort of wider to bring sort of Damian and Michael in to answer some questions as well. I wanted to ask you, we've seen obviously sort of a number of metro mayors, most recently sort of West Yorkshire being established, and there's a sort of organic process working with local communities to make sure these are effective. But obviously it means that there are areas without sort of regional government structures that don't have the devolved skills provision. What are the government's plans to potentially further open up devolution to local areas, and will that involve further devolution of skills provision? And actually, I'm going to tie in with that just a point that someone's raised in the Q&A, which is for those areas that don't have any opportunity for sort of skills devolution programs. Obviously, joint working between departments, so for instance, MHLCG and DWP, DFE is going to be crucial. And I just wondered whether you wanted to sort of highlight what goes on behind the scenes, your work sort of with other departments, how that actually happens. But I think it'd be quite interesting for the audience to know how departments do collaborate as well.
Absolutely, thanks, Chris. I can give a sort of half answer to this question if I can. It is typical politician speak. I mean, firstly, the short answer to your overall question, is there going to be more scope for devolution? I think the categorical answer is yes. We absolutely want to do that and want to include skills devolution in that. Our view remains the fact that regardless whether it's an urban area, rural area, wherever it might be in our country, devolving power over skills drives improvement, because local areas know their communities best, they're best placed to deliver some of these programs. I think you're starting to see some of the impacts of that through the work we've done with metro mayors and mayoral combined authorities as well. Clearly, the Levelling Up white paper will set out the vast majority of the future funding policy in that position. But the Prime Minister is going to be speaking very, very shortly about this, so expect to hear more in the coming days about our plans. I think what I would say is that our approach here remains consistent, and I think will remain consistent, which is that we want to devolve and decentralise power. That's clear. We want locally led reorganisation. We are not moving into any world of top-down reform. That's not the government's direction. We believe in different solutions. This is not about picking up the West Mids model for devolution and trying to fit it into other parts of the country. We want to deliver flexible local solutions that work for places. We don't want people feel they're being forced into models that just don't work for them for whatever reason that might be. So we want to make sure it's tailored. I think one of the other things I reflect on is that towns and counties are an equally important part of our country, our society, our infrastructure as some of the big urban centres, and we don't believe they should be excluded from that conversation about devolution just because there is a model which is ill-fitting to that type of community. So that's a really important, I think, thing that we're thinking about. What is the future model there, and how can it be delivered? I think I'll probably let the Prime Minister answer the rest of that question in just a couple of days' time, for fear of being severely reprimanded. But and also the points that you've raised about working between different government departments is really important too. And perhaps I can use an example of perhaps of the UK Community Renewal Fund, which we're delivering in tandem with the Department for Work and Pensions. I mean, there was a long informed discussion between the WP and its CLG and the Treasury about the way to make sure that we injected the most possible expertise into this process, the ownership over some of these programs that we're going to be delivering. It was a competitive process, so local areas have submitted proposals to us, and DWP will be taking the lead, even though our department is coordinating in assessing and understanding and adding value to those plans as they've come through. So we're really, really working closely with them. The second example perhaps is just on the capital-based levelling up funding, where a lot of those might be transport schemes, for example. So the DFT are providing all the expertise in that respect. And actually, we're going to go out across government in lots of these funds as well to take representations from all departments and the devolved administrations as well to make sure that they are providing input as well into these sorts of conversations. So it really is, depending on the type of scheme and policy outcome you're trying to deliver, designed around that to make sure we're sort of bringing in expertise from different government departments.
Thank you. And obviously, over this sort of past 18 months, local authorities have played an incredibly important role in the pandemic, supportive role, Many are now setting up sort of post-COVID recovery sort of programs, and we've heard from Damian some of the best practice when it comes to Doncaster's work around lifelong education. But how can we spread these examples of best practice that exist at a local level and try to raise them up to a national framework? Whether you had any thoughts on how we can, inspire those local authorities who want to be involved in place-based approaches to education, don't know how. Where's the role for sort of government as an agency to highlight this? Where's the role for the Commission? Your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, this is my job to say this, so I would, but I really think it's true. I do think local government are in lots of ways the unsung heroes of this pandemic. They've been so remarkably flexible, dynamic in delivering solutions. I was the Minister for Rough Sleeping at the time when the pandemic hit. I remember that period last sort of March, April, May, when we asked councils to bring in every rough sleeper across the country. And actually they contacted, outside of London, 99% of known rough sleepers across the country and offered them accommodation within a period of a few weeks. It was a remarkable response. And on that, you now see over 30,000 people moving from emergency situations into long-term housing pathways. So the response has been incredible. On the issue of sharing best practice, I think there's a number of different ways that government can and should be involved here. Firstly, there's the very traditional way that we have done this through providing leadership support through the local government organisation, other type of arrangements. So we essentially pay the local government association every year to provide support, and they do that in sharing best practice and other mechanisms as well. So it's a very traditional way that we've always done that. You just asked at the tailor end, I should interject here, about how the Commission could add value to this conversation about sharing best practice. I think one of the really interesting things that the Commission can think about is how some of this best practice sharing government commissions can be better targeted at regionalised, localised, local authority-based improvement solutions. Now we do have a situation which sort of in some ways encourages government to commission support for councils across the country on, in some ways, an almost unilateral basis at a basic level. But actually, I think one of the things that we see now as we move into a real world of local leadership in delivering some of these funding is that what we don't want to end up is in a situation where individual councils really are struggling to have the capacity to bid for and deliver some of these funding programs. And I think one of the things that we're really thinking about is how can we help local authorities in that situation who might historically not be used to that sort of mechanism really get the expertise, share the expertise. I think there's much more for us to do centrally to think about how we target that support rather than provide blanket provision. So there's that sort of generic support that we provide as a government commission now traditionally. There's also, just to hark back to the rough sleeping example, ways that we sort of mandate this, I guess in some ways, but through the programs we deliver, but rely on local government expertise. So for example, in the most extreme examples where there are lots of rough sleepers, we asked councils to essentially mark each other's plans for delivering accommodation options and then support each other in the delivery of that using their expertise in matching up some similar types of communities across the country. So we do it through some of the programme options we deliver as well. I think two more ways I can very quickly. One is what we've really improved on during the pandemic is the way that we collect data from councils. We started collecting much more data about council spend, about council performance, about council outcomes in lots of ways. And that's been really useful, not least to make the argument to Treasury about the support the councils need, but also to have more information at our fingertips. We're now moving into a world of not necessarily needing to collect that every month, but we do want to look at how we can publish more data to drive competition, transparency, best practice sharing amongst councils as well. I think there's an important piece of work on transparency that we can do there, and that will help and drive progress. The last point I just highlight on this is on digital transformation, because we do quite a lot in this space now, where we're funding individual councils to do digital transformation projects, really transform the way they're delivering some services and starting to move online. There's some great examples how just through providing 100, 200, 300,000 pounds, you can enable a council to transform a service digitally, and then they are sharing the outcomes of that once it's past the required phases later on. So, for example, that might be in delivering child social care platforms, information online. It could be anything from planning reform as well. There are also some examples in the world of education as well, I think, and childcare provision. So I think we're funding a couple of £100,000 for developing common data models for children's services, statutory returns. Sounds quite a small dry point to make, but actually it's quite important in terms of sharing best practice as well. So a number of different ways we can do it, and definitely a way that I think you could help us in working out how to really target some councils better with government support in areas that need to build the capacity the most.
Can I ask a final question of the Minister, and then sort of I think Philip wants to ask a question for the panelists as well. So we're seeing sort of an increase in partnerships now emerging between universities, FE colleges, and obviously in certain areas, local authorities are also being involved in those partnerships as well. How do you feel partnerships be sort of fostered and built upon? And I'm going to tie in just a question that's come up from one of the panelists, Charlotte Morris, which was actually, is there a role for local enterprise partnerships as well for the future in this work?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Chris and Charlotte. I think in recent years, there's been some, I certainly think there's been some really encouraging partnership working. You're right, not just between universities and colleges, but also between councils as well. And clearly, ultimately, the successful delivery of services will just require that joined-up approach to nurturing talent in the way we want. We do want to foster more relationships like this, more local partnerships, probably especially at the college level, I think as well. I know the DFE are going out to consult on some of this soon. I think perhaps from an MHCLG perspective, if I can, one of the main points that I would make here is that proper funding and resourcing delivered at a local level are fundamental to delivering some of the changes that we want to see. And that's certainly my view and our view. So perhaps I'd sort of hark back to the UK Community Renewal Fund example here. We're allowing universities, voluntary groups, community sector groups to work with councils to submit applications for transformative local projects, be that in skills, workforce training, capacity, and then they'll have to work with the councils to deliver those projects, sometimes over a number of years. So I think that is a new initiative that will be really positive. And crucially, of course, although that's just a one-year programme, that's really helping shape our thinking about the future design of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which is the bigger prize here in lots of ways as well. So I think that's really important. So we want universities, colleges to work with councils here, helping deliver some of these capital revenue-based programmes. Look, on local enterprise partnerships, look, I think that the starting point here for us is, how can we make sure we have an effective representation of the business voice in delivering delivering some of these important transformations in be it high street regeneration, town centres, or skills programmes. That's really important, and we cannot lose that. We cannot lose such an important, effective voice, but equally want it to be accountable as well. So I think as we look to ramp up some of this funding that we're delivering, clearly we have the ongoing review of the LEPs and Secretary of State and Bayes, and Robert Jemrick's thinking closely about that. So we'll keep you updated as and when we can on that. But I certainly reassure you that I think nobody here is arguing that we should in any way lose or lessen the business representation voice that makes such a big difference.
Mr. Hall, thank you so much for the opportunity to listen to you today as part of this evidence session, launch of the second report for the Commission. I realise you may have to head off now, but I'm going to turn to Philip Blond, who I think would like to ask a question of the wider panellists, who sat very patiently listening to the Minister's responses, and maybe they might want to reflect also on what the Minister's said also. So Philip, hand over to you, please.
Thank you, and thank you, Minister. I'm often struck by how central government is very aware of the most innovative thinking and rightly tries to fund it. But I'm also aware at a local level that what really makes the difference is the presence of a controlling mind. And I always think it's a bit like the British Olympic team, that you've got multiple factors and you want to make improvements in each factor, but you want them all working together. And the trouble, I think, with and this predates this government. But the trouble with a kind of a Whitehall model for engendering transformation in left behind areas is it's siloed, it's in small pots of money that are quite onerous to apply for according to different kind of criteria. And everything goes also to different people. So you've got the employer's levy, you've got money going to the LEPs, you've got money going to universities and colleges. And it's very, very difficult outside of particularly charismatic chief executives or local leadership to coordinate all these manifold different bits of money within a holistic approach. And we know from multiple work that internationally, and we as ResPublica have probably worked with every single local authority, certainly in England, and we do a lot of great consultancy. And the biggest lack is the inability to create a single controlling mind for an area. That's almost the biggest barrier to transformation of those areas. And one way I think that we could approach this is through the ideal, it comes from, recall Heseltine's single regeneration budget. I think if we could at least pilot in an area the idea of a single budget for all post-16 education on which all the recipients of that budget sit, and so we can make holistic decisions for an area for that budget as a whole. And I just think that theoretically, and we know from evidence elsewhere, could be the step change that is needed, because many local authorities that we go to, you know, that they can't move. They lack either, they're too opposed, that it's too difficult, and it's actually quite a leap for local authorities to become the single controlling mind. And many of the places that are left behind essentially aren't able to create collaboration. So I'm just wondering, Minister, if I may, can we create something that, at least a pilot for that, and then a duty on anyone receiving funding to consult with the local authority, just to give them a chance to create this collaboration that could make the difference?
Thanks, Philip. I mean, I think the points that you've raised are absolutely legitimate. When we held all of the consultation events when we started to hold the consultation events for the successor to the EU structural funds, I think you just gave a very articulate summary of the 500 stakeholder responses we had in response to that. They all talked about, you know, having more power over delivering funding, having less silo, you know, bureaucratic pillars, they were called, the EU structural funds to deliver. So that's absolutely a key thing that we're trying to trial through the UK CRF. So I completely understand that point. And also the sort of general representation you make about freedom and flexibility of areas to deliver is one I think is echoed by lots of the metro mayors that are already in place around the country. So certainly thinking about that in advance of the Levelling Up white paper. Do listen out for the Prime Minister's speech later this week. I guess the only other point I would slightly add is that having accepted the vast majority of what you said, I also think in some respect it goes further than that for councils, in that it's not. Two more points. One is it's not just on the local growth funding. This is a problem for councils. You know, one of the biggest complaints that I hear day to day is, you know, why are you ring fencing, you know, far too much of my budget that comes into councils. And I think we really want to look at that and make sure we're, you know, understanding that we are delivering in the right places, the flexibility to deliver the right sort of programs. There's clearly a balance there between trying to deliver central government priorities and using the ring fencing mechanisms to do that, and giving councils the power to crack on with what they want to do. I think most councils would argue, and I think we would probably disagree, that there is a lot of ring fencing that could be just removed generally. And the last point is just on local leadership. I think local leadership is just absolutely critical, and it comes back to this point, doesn't it, about, you know, mayors may well be right for some parts of the country, they may well not be right for parts of the country. If there is good, strong local leadership that can deliver for a community, we should be supporting that with devolution and, you know, further freedoms as well. So I think we're sort of, you know, absolutely in the market for all of this, and you know, listen out to what the PM's going to say very shortly.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Minister Hall. And I realise now we've run out of time for this session. So please, thank you for your time. Just by way of close, I didn't know whether Damian or Michael wanted to make any sort of closing remarks in terms of reflecting on this discussion. By all means, Minister, please head off to whatever urgent meeting you've got. I'm sure there are things in your diary. I noticed some of the panelists asked some interesting sort of questions I wanted just quickly to sort of reflect and end upon. One is from Charlotte Morris, who's through Salford University, a member of the commission, and she's the corporate and regional affairs manager, which is around the higher education sort of participation target. Minister Hall noted that only 30% of the population in Barrow had a higher education qualification and pointed to education black spots through that metric. Whether we need to sort of, as has been mentioned by the Education Secretary, ditch the target, or whether a higher education participation is still effective proxy. Does levelling up mean more or fewer people going to university? Interesting to sort of get your thoughts on that. And also another sort of question from one of our commissioners, Johnny Rich, which is, how do we avoid the risk of plugging today's skills gaps through our current training programme, when perhaps we need to sort of develop lifelong flexible skills that are bespoke and can be tailored for the future world of work, and whether that's something that sort of Doncaster has anticipated also. And so just, I think, by way of closing remarks, Damian and Michael, if you had any thoughts, and then we'll sort of wrap up the session.
Yeah, more than happy to do that. First of all, I'm reading from the prospect of being the single controlling mind in the local. I feel a bit Mike Myers, and stroking. As soon as you can arrange that, the better. No, actually, conversely, I'm more in favour of the power of influence over the influence of power. And I don't think you need necessarily one of those to be able to collaborate. And we've done that very effectively with the institutions and organisations. With regard to the higher education targets, I don't think Tony Blair's 50% target does any favours. That's my first statement. And if you want to know why, then search out my TEDx place-based higher education hybrid model of learning, which is at the heart of our city university model, because actually it's a drain on local talent. And what we need to do is transform the post-16 and hybrid higher education in the place, so that people are acquiring those competencies, and that the model and the mode of acquiring those competencies and skills is accredited and is also portable and is in bite-sized chunks, because the world doesn't wait for the 5-year process of translating a new specification for a new qualification, recruiting the staff to deliver it, etc., etc. We need a much more agile, engaged system locally, which transfers people from the supply into the demand. And I know the Commission is post sort of 16, but the cradle to career is crucial. And I think, the suggestions around more place-based, joined up working with government, the pilot idea that Phillip provides, it's that the only power I want is the power to innovate with the integrated ability to implement that, so that there's a sensitivity of touch that goes below the threshold of naturally what government wants to do in terms of its framework. And the best example of that is the opportunity area, which was focused mainly around attainment outcomes. But actually, if the government made the Essential Life Skills Framework official policy, didn't just see it as out of school applicability, but saw it as mainstream, gave it recognition and accreditation with the appropriate financial support, and expanded the scope and duration of those social mobility opportunity areas to become enterprise and skills areas, I think we've probably got into the zone that Phillip was talking about. So I'll end it there. Thank you, Chris.
Just a final thought, Michael. Thank you. Just a final thought for me. The OECD's spent 3 years talking to the top performing education systems in the world about the future of education, as I said. And we've touched on many of these issues. The Nordics, the East Asians, the Canadians. And they all buy heavily into local delivery of these complex adaptive systems. Some of them like to talk about ecosystems and some of them don't. But the only ones that are really good at it are those which trust local delivery and are prepared to let go. I'm thinking of the Nordics and to some extent of the Canadians. But the question then does arise, who's in charge and who does the orchestration, even if it's not a single controlling mind. I think the council's one answer in an English context, but it takes a remarkable council under remarkable leadership. I think another emerging answer is universities, which after all can provide, can broker, can orchestrate, and arguably can do the future thinking about strategy and what's needed, future skills, but especially maybe new start universities that don't bring all the baggage. And I'm thinking now of NMIT in Hereford and potentially the University City Initiative, which Damian is leading in Doncaster. So I think there is a role for orchestration led by new universities, but a consolidated budget wouldn't half help to Philip's question, and an opportunity to pilot that sort of thing, I think would be really welcome in the UK context.
Well, thank you very much, Michael, and thank you, Damian, for your participation today. Really looking forward to working with you and partners in Doncaster on this second report around sort of place-based approach to lifelong education. I think it's an incredibly exciting sort of opportunity, particularly with the levelling up agenda so foremost in the government's mind currently. And thank you to audience for listening into this event for the Lifelong Education Commission. We have another evidence session that's taking place, I think, on Monday, and I think a tweet and emails will be sent around informing everyone of how to join that session for next week. I'm really grateful again for ResPublica and Phillip for their support for the Lifelong Education Commission, and look forward to working with everyone in future. And with that, I think we'll sort of close the session. Thank you for joining, and look forward to seeing everyone soon. Goodbye.